So what's good, YouTube? This
Hello.
Charles Hopkins here.
And Ozzy Cargyle. What do we want to talk to you today? We're going to talk to you about the truth and why the truth is so important and what it means to really have the truth. There are people going around saying things like you can have your own truth, live your truth. Yes, those feel very good in an inclusionist age, and some of that's important. But it's also very damaging when you have literally world leaders going around with their own truth and devastating lives, through policies that are anything but true, that are false. So let's talk about truth. Truth ultimately is an agreement that we have with regard to our shared experience, this experience that we call reality. Truth is important in contrast to what we understand to be lies. So when you talk about lies, you really get into the idea of deception. And what deception is I present one thing and cause you to believe it's something, but reality is something else. In other words, I infuse a certain relative reality into you while hiding the ultimate reality. And it causes you to behave in such a way that's usually advantageous to me and disadvantageous to you. So anyone who's experienced being lied to knows that's not fun. That's not something that you want to have. So we as humans, we have this concept called truth. And what truth is the combatant of the lie. It's the thing that we're going to agree upon so we don't find ourselves in a disarray of disagreements around what the truth of reality is. So, with that in mind, truth is an agreement, but we need to also understand that truth is not necessarily democratic. It's not true because everybody thinks it's true. The fact that everybody believes it could be an indication that there's some truth around it, or everybody could just be believing a lie. So in science, what we attempt to do is we try to verify things through experimentation. That if I do this and get this result, and you do the same thing and get the exact same result, and we do that independently, whatever this thing is, the subject matter that we're trying to observe will give us the truth of what it is, and our individual biases towards it or towards one another won't get into the mix. That's not really possible, but it works by and large when you get to things where you're studying things that are sort of objective in their basis, like chemistry or sociology. After you've seen patterns of how human psychology works, you can say, okay, this is scientifically generally understood to be a normal person, or a person who's schizophrenic, or whatever it is, and it becomes a truth there. Whatever your standard of judging the truth is important to understand that the truth will be validated by the subject. In other words, if I'm proclaiming a truth about something, intrinsic into the essence of what that is, I should be able to find that there regardless of my bias towards it. So if I tell you the truth of Ozzy is that he's a black man, then somebody who does not know who Ozzy is, but knows that he's a black man, should first have that identifying characteristic, and that there's a certain truth to what it means to be black and how that identifies me. If you came to me and suddenly you discovered that I was not black by what that understanding truly is, there's a problem. And so the biggest question is going to be, well, who gets to define black? And this is probably one of the biggest, most misunderstood things about truth. We define things. It's just our responsibility to define with respect, intelligent with respect to the subject. That's it. We make the definitions. And I think if you're a black person, you have a certain priority to be at the forefront of defining blackness. Now, some people don't want that. Some people don't want to have that kind of responsibility. But if you live in a society that's defining that in a negative way, it's incumbent upon you to take that on. If you're a scientist, then it's incumbent upon you to define the areas of your expertise so that other scientists can get involved. me get some water. So yeah, truth is an agreement, but it has to be an agreement that is validated by the subject. So the subject is going to define what the truth is with regard to it. And this is, I believe this is a revelation that society is gradually coming on to, particularly around things like LGBT rights, you know, where people are now identifying with different sexualities, different gender identities, redefining what society has said, nope, it's this way and that way and no other way. You know, now we have a culture that will allow you to identify in different ways. And there's a lot of debates on how far should your definition go, and whether those definitions should be generally accepted. You know, that's one thing. And I think, you know, as a culture, we are going to successfully navigate that space. But then there are other kinds of truths. Like, did Donald Trump win the last U.S. election? Hell no! He didn't. Like, so that's not a place where, you know, we each get to have our own truth and we want to have this movement of let's kind of look at it and share and tolerate different perspectives. What's the subject there? You know, the subject is the election. The election as an event, you know, as tabulated in machines and on paper, and through the sentiment of the people and at the polls and the exit polls and the coverage and the courts, and like the election was a thing. It was an event in U.S. history that had its own bearings that the entire world watched, and we literally all sat there and watched Donald Trump lose an election and watched him lie about it and watch, you know, those, you know, people circling around him dance that dance, calling it their own truth. And because there was a respect for the office of the presidency, they let him get away with it. That's not true. That's not the kind of truth that we're talking about. We don't want you to get into the idea that just because you get to define truth as the subject that is you also get to define that the ultimate reality
of the subject that we all share.
Right, exactly.
Because it still affected us, and we all clearly observed that wasn't the case. And so, in a world where truth, or everyone having their own personal truth, is highly valued, but at the same time, truth as a concept is not really understood, you get situations like that. So that's how we talk about observation. Observation is the act of interpretation by which the subject of reality is defined by the observer. So we're already interpreting when we're observing, when we're looking, when we're observing something, we're also defining it. So we just defining it based off of what actually happened and how that affected us and how that affects the rest of the game. It's a more investigative mindset. It's a more analytical approach to the truth, but it's also more freeing because usually the information is always in that present moment. The agreement that will validate that perception of reality is usually always in that present moment.
The game will tell you the truth. And this is the weird thing about truth. Truth is this kind of thing where it's apparent. You know, if it's real, it's real. If it happened, it happened. You know, and if it's happening, it's happening. We want you to, let's add some terms to our understanding of this conversation around truth. And we talked about them before, we're talking about them again right now. Relative versus ultimate. Okay, so your relative experience of reality can be truthfully experienced by you, but the information that it's given to you can ultimately be a lie. So you can feel like the election was stolen, right? And that could be your real, like, that's what you really feel. But that is a relative reality. It is a true experience of existence, but it's not ultimate to the entire intelligence of consciousness that makes up humanity. And so as a collective, what we're striving for are to understand truths that we can all see as true, that are validated by the subjects that we're studying. So we're studying an election, for example, we're going to validate the truth of the election based on the election results. If we're studying consciousness, then we're going to get into how do we validate consciousness? What are the experiments? What are the things, the tools that we can use to get into that world so that I know that this conscious experience that I say that I'm having is actually the experience that I'm having. Like, this would be, really phenomenal when we get into like manifestation and stuff like that. Because there's a lot of conversation about what it means to manifest and how do I manifest from my mind and how do I perform this, my magic, so to speak. And that there is a flow, there is a truth to that energy. But it must be understood, and you have to arm your mentality with what it means for something to truly be true. If you don't do that at first, you're going to get lost. Because for all it is, reality is very fanciful. It's very fantastic. Reality is kind of the most unrealistic thing around.
Right,
It's thoroughly equipped with the ability to fool you. And that's sort of the majesty and mystery of what it is. So there is a thing is true. It does have a subjectivity to it. But it is focused on an object. It's focused on the subject. The subject, and that subject is the most important thing. Like when you're studying the subject will give you the validation. And that's how you know you get the truth. When it's not just you saying it, but that when you turn away and you take your influence away from it, it's still that thing. That's when you know it's true.
Right, yeah. Especially when you think about the statement, getting in closer to connection with ourselves, learning to know ourselves more. Our assessment of reality with respect to our definitions of self.
Right.
Getting into the flow of manifestation is in large part about being able to change your self-definitions to reflect more of the truth of the more ultimate state of reality, as far as the actual energetic agreements and verdicts that are making the game run as efficiently, as smoothly as it is running, and wanting to manifest in that manner. Then there's something about my relative reality, or the way I'm ultimately defining it, that needs to be reassessed according to these observations that I can make about this outside world that is also myself. So law of consciousness expands our definition of self, and knowing that it is beyond our personification of consciousness. It is beyond this personage, even though it's always going to be ultimately. This is the part we all love to explore. This is the part we all want to have and experience. Right. This is what it's all about.
Right.
But there is parts of us that are beyond us in a weird kind of way. But yet still are affecting us in ways that you start to explore when you go down the road of spirituality.
Yeah.
That's where spirituality takes you into this journey of
synchronicity.
Yes,
synchronicity is the first thing that really opens you up to the true nature of spirituality. When things become aligned, they add to one another, as opposed to subtracting to one another. And synchronicity is one of the first indications that your life is in alignment. When stuff just starts popping up together, and it just seemed like that was just a little too perfect, you're like, oh, it's just a coincidence. There is no such thing as coincidence. There are no mistakes. Everything is consequential to everything else, to varying degrees according to the order of certainty, according to the order of creation. Like it's organized. It makes sense. But what you do can actually affect not just what's going on the other side of the world. It can reverberate throughout human history and the history of this solar system. So, because it's all connected. It's all connected. So synchronicities are the first things that says, that means something. There's a communication there. And now it's up to me to figure out what that means.